Tatonga, Kia ma kina kina kiuta, Kia ma taratara kitai, E hiake ana atakura, He tio, He huka, He hauhu, Humie huie, Tai kie. Thank you again for being here this evening. My name is Rachel Tapera. I'm one of the co-founders for the Migrant Neuro-Inclusion Network. So at MEAN, at the Migrant Neuro-Inclusion Network, our vision is to create inclusive spaces where neurodivergent migrants and their families can be seen, can be heard, and can be supported. So this webinar is part of our ongoing efforts to raise awareness, to share knowledge, and to bring communities together in conversation about neurodiversity. I think this organization has come out of the needs that were found from our communities, with people really airing or really talking about the challenges that they have accessing services, but also just spaces where, you know, conversations can be held on neurodiversity and how it's understood by the different communities. So I think this is one of our sort of the starting steps of getting this information out, creating these spaces for these conversations to happen. So this evening, it is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Leshaun Perumal, or simply Leshaun. He's happy to be called that way. Leshaun has worked with neurodiverse children, teenagers and adults for over 25 years in a variety of roles. He specializes in neuroaffirming psychotherapy and carries out autism and ADHD assessments. He also provides positive behavior support services. Leshaun is also an autism teen life facilitator and a triple P stepping stones provider. So amongst all of those things, he also runs his own practice part-time and has a passion to simply support all people to flourish. So there's a whole lot about Leshaun that I've just left out, but he's a remarkable person to be here with us this evening, just to take us through this session. I leave this time to you, Leshaun. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I really consider it a privilege to be able just to share today. I will be sharing from my knowledge and my experience, and I hope that there will be at least one thing that each person who's attending today can take away from this, that they find useful for themselves or for somebody else. But I also want to just acknowledge that there's likely to be a lot of experience here. I'm thinking that there are families represented here, there are professionals who are here, there's people who are researching and curious around the area of neurodiversity themselves, and many people practicing as well. So I just want to acknowledge all of the knowledge, the wealth of knowledge that's represented here today. Without further ado, I'm going to go share a PowerPoint presentation, and that's going to lead us into some of the key talking points. Today's presentation is focused at an introduction level to neurodiversity, but it's important to note that there may be questions or thoughts that might need a little bit more attention or a little bit more detail. We're focusing on having a Q&A time at the end of the session and hopefully get through to all of your questions. I've mentioned to the organizers that if we aren't able to get through to all of the questions, or there's something I simply cannot answer, I'm happy to be able to get back to you in some way or the other, just to kind of help meet that need here. So without any further ado, I'm going to share the PowerPoint and we'll take it from there. Great. So as you all may be aware, today's presentation is focused on understanding neurodiversity and finding support. And I included the term beyond labels because labels are important for us to understand. And as humans, we categorize information, we try to make sense of experiences, and this is what labels help to do. Sometimes, however, labels can be very limiting. Once again, I'd just like to acknowledge all of those who are neurodivergent. There may be some individuals attending tonight who are questioning or wondering about themselves, why they're experiencing life in a very different way, why they have some unique challenges, and why they have some unique strengths compared to others. There are families also who are working through this, as well as professionals who are working tirelessly in many instances to help people. So thank you so much for the introduction earlier on. And it was really spot on about my experiences, but this is a little overview about myself and what's led me to this particular point. I was really flattered when I saw the invitation describing me as an expert. I just have an accumulation of knowledge and experiences and hope to continue to share that to whoever may find it helpful in their life journey. So these pictures represent my professional experience that's brought me to this particular point. Two things that weren't mentioned earlier on in the lovely introduction was that I've been under clinical supervision, continue to be under that, and which is really important in guiding practice and being able to have clarity as well when there are scenarios or situations that are unique. So I've had the privilege of being under supervision with Leshaun Smith, who's a registered neuropsychologist, and also through when I worked at Explore under a clinical psychologist, Leshaun Perumal. Above it all, I think what keeps me motivated in this particular area is lived experience. And it's in a variety of forms. When I think about friends, family, community members that I grew up with, I now look at some of our relationships, our interactions very differently when I consider neurodiversity. And even some of the clients I've worked with along the way, where professionals, we've tried with different teams and different resources trying to assist them, but just missing something, and we couldn't figure out what that was. And neurodiversity is actually quite a core part of that. It's if you know the 5 P's of formulation, that's a predisposing factor. It's something that's there already, you know, that impacts the way problems can come about. So what is neurodiversity? The term was actually coined by a social worker, and they used the term, looked at the term biodiversity, and just as the way we can get different types of creatures and organisms within a particular ecosystem. This particular term was developed to say that actually there are many different types of perspectives, and that's coming from a place of our own neurodevelopment. So different ways the brain processes information. Some may see things, hear things, experience things very differently from most people. Also, it's important with neurodiversity is that there is no correct way for the brain to work. Instead, it is the way that individual is experiencing life and different sensory stimuli. With neurodiversity, also there's different labels or different diagnoses that's come under its banner, like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and many other variations. And so we start to understand this as creating a banner for which we can understand difference as well. So this image represents some of the neurodiversity that occurs out there. And as I mentioned earlier on, we were thinking autism is, and I'm really grateful that it's a lot more in mainstream media. There's a lot more awareness around autism, about the challenges and the strengths, as well as ADHD. But then we have other neurodiversity that is not as well known. For example, dyspraxia, and which is often associated with a learning difficulty. We have dyscalculia, the difficulty with counting or using numbers as well. And dyslexia, we know, may be a challenge with being able to read. What I really like about this particular image and why I chose it was that it's strengths focused. In my practice, I've met I continue to meet some incredible individuals. Despite them having individual challenges, the strengths that they have and the unique giftings and talents they have are absolutely amazing. And I'm not exaggerating, where there's times where I just, they're sharing something with me or telling me something, and I'm like gobsmacked, not knowing how to respond, because it's information I never considered. A quick example is just in last week, an 8-year-old was sharing with me. She's autistic and has ADHD. She's had quite a lot of difficulties throughout this year, but she's on a journey of just recovery and doing much better. And she mentioned to me that in the first term of this year, they had an information report at class that they needed to present on. She could only write 3 sentences and a few words. In the next term, with the right types of support and guidance and helping her to understand what was required of her, she told me last week that she wrote 2 pages, and she was really proud of it, and she got a little reward as well. And in those pages, she wrote about information which are her strengths, the things that she really loves, her passion. She wrote about animals, and she described about the giant blue octopus and its different abilities, and why the humpback whale is called the humpback whale. And I must say, I sat there thrilled by the amount of information and detail this little girl had. We also know that with neurodiversity, there can be various mental health conditions and overlap as well. Autism, ADHD, even just the overlap between the two creates quite a unique presentation that even diagnostic criteria right now does not pick up. But you'll find that a lot of the individuals who are questioning whether they're autistic or ADHD right now and are functioning well could likely have a crossover of the two. And then there's acquired neurodiversity. So we think about those who might have traumatic brain injuries, or been hurt, car accidents, or any other things that have impacted the way their neurology kind of works. That could influence their experience of the world. So I'm going to go into a case study quickly, just to make this a bit more relevant. This is a real story, and Mom C has given me permission to present this. The C is not her original name. So when I met C, I was working as a positive behavior specialist. I already had my work in mental health and pediatrics, as well as in care and protection social work, and I was working as a behavior specialist. The reason why I met with Mom was that one of her children was having severe challenges with school, with learning, and even behavioral problems at home. When she shared with me her story, the core of it was that she had similar experiences to her son when growing up. She had difficulties at school with concentration. She had difficulties in understanding others. She got into depression, had high levels of anxiety regularly. She was supported by doctors, and then the mental health system also with medication. Unfortunately, this did not target or meet what was her exact needs. Eventually, she was diagnosed with psychosis as well, feeling really distressed, feeling like she's hearing voices or seeing images that weren't really there. It impacted her to the point that she struggled to find a job. But in the late 20s, she was diagnosed with ADHD. And she told me that when she found out it was ADHD, suddenly there was lots of experiences in her life that made sense. 3 years later, she was confirmed as being autistic as well. And now there was such a lot more clarity for her. She still needed support though. And it was actually the work that we did with her child or children that actually helped her to learn a lot more about her neurodiversity and her own strengths as well as the challenges. In our work together, we found out that she actually has sensory sensitivities, her hearing, visual sensory sensitivity, tactile, to the point that if it was all too much for her, it was overwhelming. We actually discovered that there were certain times of the day when she was distressed, when a child was distressed, her energy levels were so low that it was hard for her to parent as well. And it added higher levels of stress for her. And so it was almost as like detectives together, we started to get a lot more information about what worked well for her, what worked well for her children. We discovered that actually there could be more than one child who's neurodiverse, and we actually confirmed that in the process as well. And that helped to actually give direction for the strategies that was needed to help support this family. The youngest child who had the biggest behavioral issues actually missed out on lots of different key building blocks at school. So he was labeled as being naughty, defiant. It was labeled as being intolerant. But actually, these were behaviors were just a form of defense and protection, because he'd sit in class and nothing would kind of register with him because of the way things were communicated. Some things were beyond his level of understanding because he missed out on some building blocks, whether it was in maths or English or some other type of learning. And so it became frustrated for him. His ADHD focus and attention within a very confined space wasn't understood or supported. And so he was labeled as the troublemaker. And so if he found no motivation to go to school. With our work together and lots of advocacy with the school team, and eventually finding individuals in the school team who were able to empathize and support him, there became a turnaround for him, where there was actually days where he looked forward to going to school. C's story highlights that actually just treating something based on what we see and what's currently presenting as an issue might not always get to the root of it. And neurodiversity is an important way to understand what the root is. We didn't go down the route of dyslexia or any learning difficulties for C. What we actually found out that she's amazingly intelligent. She can absorb information at rates that typically people don't take in. Yeah. Hope that's useful for someone. So the iceberg analogy is that what we see on the top, like an iceberg, you know, with an iceberg, you see what you see above the surface of the water is a mass, but actually below the surface of the water, there's a lot more that goes on with it. From a strengths perspective, we can see with neurodiversity, there's critical thinking, creativity. Most neurodivergent people who are supported and are flourishing are entrepreneurs, they're founders, they're CEOs, they're amazing sports people, celebrities, artists, the list goes on and on. And below that, they've actually learned to have resilience, courage, to actually break through all that has been confining them. Yeah, let's go through it. So quickly, some of you may be quite aware of this, but we want to talk about just autism in case you're wondering about autism. So autism, the diagnostic criteria for autism comes from a manual, the key manual called the DSM-5. which is a diagnostic and statistics manual of mental disorders. Now, autism is not a mental disorder. It's important to note that. It's a neurodevelopmental difference. But when they were developing the criteria, it came from the bodies of knowledge in psychiatry and psychology and continued in this particular manual. The current core criteria is mainly around social and communication differences. So some people are highly articulate. They can talk in not just one language, multiple language. The issue is not about being able to talk, but it's about how communication flows back and forth in a social way. Is that communication benefiting the person that's listening to the autistic person? Is there are they empathizing? Do they have a opportunity to understand what the other person is experiencing and then communicating from that perspective? And actually in all instances of autism, there is a natural difference. It's considered a deficit, but it's a natural difference in social communication. There are others who are autistic who may not use a verbal communication. They could use sign language. They can use other types of sounds to communicate, and that can also impact social communication. But it does not mean that they're unable to communicate. Other core parts of it is that there's a need for sameness or routine. That predictability actually lowers stress and actually makes the world make sense for the world. It gives some sort of order, and logic is actually preferred. There could also be a desire to do repetitive types of behaviors and very focused interests, to the point that these interests may take lots of time and lots of energy as well. Some movements that can be observed could be something called stimming. Stimming is the movement of the body in a particular way to create a sense within the person that could be calming, that could be helpful. So rocking back and forward, tapping foot, flapping arms, rocking your head, or even verbal types of stimming can be quite comfortable. Someone observing the stimming could feel awkward. Someone observing may feel, oh, this is weird. But actually, until we ask the person who's stimming what their experience is, we don't know whether it's actually a positive or a negative experience. And then there's also the hypersensitivity to certain types of sensory input. We know sensory input could be sight, sound, smell, but an important one that I'd like to leave with you for this session is think about the sense that's not commonly known. It's called interoception. INTEROCEPTION. And interoception is a sense that we all have. So as you're listening to me right now, I'd like you just to take a deep breath in. And as you breathe in, release now. The next time you breathe in, I'd like you just to think about your lungs as the air is going in. Breathe in. The lungs are expanding, and breathe out. Your lungs have contracted, but there's also been an impact on the muscles around the abdominal area. Now, interoception is the signals coming from within the body through to the brain that are interpreted, and then it's given some information on what to do next. So for some individuals, there's something wrong with that signal when it goes from the original source through to the brain, and then it's almost like a misinterpretation or something different with the wiring. I'll give you an example. There was a young 11-year-old boy that I worked with who's autistic and came across as highly anxious. And we need to understand why anxiety was continuing for him. And one of the key things you do in our sessions was bring his water bottle. And often when we'd get into topics or themes that were feeling a little uncomfortable for him, he'd be sipping on his water. And I knew that he was an athlete, and I thought, oh, he was just hydrating. Eventually, when we discussed the pattern, and I recognized the pattern happening here, we found out that actually every time his abdominal muscles contracted, when he was feeling stressed or anxious, he interpreted that as needing water. And so he'd take water in and he'd have a sensation and it will feel a little bit more relaxed. What we also found out also that when his stomach contracted, when he was hungry, that signal actually didn't come through to him. So he would eat at certain times of the day because these were programmed or these were planned. But actually that signal of hunger and thirst never came through him very clearly. So there was a challenge, and that's around interoception. That's important to note because there's a lot of individuals, and I've met adults as well, who have extreme stress and anxiety and don't know why they're experiencing it, and it may relate to a sensory source. So this is an example of a particular, there's a video on YouTube of a boy going through a mall. He's walking with his mom, everything looks fine, and suddenly all of the sensory stimulation becomes overwhelming. The lights become brighter and blurry, the sounds become louder, people smiling. It's not taken in as a friendly thing, but it's looking almost like the scary clown coming in. The noise from coins dropping becomes louder and amplified. He's looking at minor details around. And suddenly, as he gets through to the center of the mall, he's just overwhelmed. And what we see is a meltdown. Actually, he was just overwhelmed to the point that he couldn't be able to manage it. And so that's an important thing to consider when we're looking at autism. We may find this also with some individuals who have ADHD who are highly sensitive to sensory stimuli and just come to a point where they can't handle it. One of the key terms is misophonia, which is particular types of sounds like chewing or clicking a tongue or slurping, and the person could be fine, but as soon as they hear that, they suddenly get into a rage or feel really overwhelmed. So this concept, the window of tolerance, is something that could be really helpful to us. Some of you may have come across this already. And if there are any professionals out there who are working with in the areas of counseling or therapy, if you're using this, that's awesome. If you're not, I really encourage you to read a little bit more about this and see how you can implement this or incorporate it into your practice. So a quick description of this right now is, as you can see the diagram, the little lines going right in the middle, that is indicating arousal. So when someone is aroused to a point that they might feel overwhelmed. And so we have this middle window, which we call the window of tolerance. And this is the ideal zone that all of us want to be in. This is a place when we're in that window, we are calm, we are creative, we're looking around, we're not thinking about safety, we're not thinking about any threats. We actually can be a lot more of ourselves. But if there a particular trigger comes about, something that makes us feel scared, worried, stressed, we can start to escalate. And so we see those lines going a little up into the escalation zone. But if there's no support and the escalation continues, we can get to a point where we hyper-arouse. And I must say, this is not just for neurodivergent individuals, this is for all people, where we can be triggered to a point where we hyper-arouse. And at that highest point is a place where we get the fight, flight, freeze, more the fight and flight actually, a kind of behaviors that come about. And at this particular point, all that needs to be done is supporting the individual to get back down through to the window of tolerance. When a person is overwhelmed, they can actually go to the other way. It could be hyperarousal. They can go into a place of feeling of freezing or fawning, just giving up on things, or not being able to do things, feeling so overwhelmed. There are some individuals who also get to a point of dissociation. And this is often where we find that overlap between trauma and neurodiversity. One of the key things which for me is a frustration, is and it's a diagnostic issue, and I don't blame any professionals around it, but the symptoms for trauma and the symptoms for ADHD that's described in our diagnostic criteria, that they match quite a bit. And sometimes, to err on the side of caution, I've met many people who've gone through diagnostic processes, and because the assessing clinicians believe that there's trauma in the background, they've stopped doing the ADHD assessment. Now, actually, you can assess for both trauma and ADHD. And actually, when you listen to the person experiencing it, it's their experience at that moment that will help clarify whether it's the ADHD that's impacting them or the trauma, even though they may look very similar at that particular point in time. And why I'm saying this right now is that the key goal really is to support people to be in that window of tolerance. Find the protective factors, find their strengths, help them to understand what's the best way to help to regulate themselves, whether it's through breathing, whether it's through walking out in nature. Sometimes, even for kids, sometimes gaming can also be helpful, but that needs to be moderated and used as a tool, and within certain boundaries as well. And also ensuring physical health. If someone is sick, they're less likely to be in their window of tolerance. If someone is hungry, they're less likely to be in their window of tolerance. If someone is very tired, they're less likely to be in their window of tolerance. And thinking about the time of this presentation right now, it's amazing that you're attending this evening, but you could be on the verge of being out of your window of tolerance if you're getting a little bit more tired. Things that limit the size of the window of tolerance is chronic stress. Stress that's happening on and on and on from day to day, and there seems to be no end to it. And unfortunately for a lot of neurodivergent individuals who are where it's unrecognized and unsupported, this becomes their life on a day-to-day basis. Chronic stress, chronic rejection, chronic criticism, chronic disappointment that eventually gets within the body itself, manifests as anxiety, manifests as other types of symptoms that needs to be managed as well. Just quickly around ADHD. ADHD, the DSM-5 and the ICD classification system, the International Classification of Diseases, where the criteria occur, have three types of ADHD. It's an inattentive type, a hyperactive type, and then a combined type, where an individual might come across as inattentive and hyperactive. Now, these are important to help us understand and access the right type of treatment and support. But the challenge with it is it's always coming from a deficit model, and it's coming from a medical model. That means it needs to be fixed up or repaired. Understanding ADHD at its core and the strengths that come with it can help people to flourish and use it in many different ways. I think of Emma Watson, from the Harry Potter series. Emma has ADHD. She was using ADHD medication while we're filming Harry Potter, and she still continues in a very successful way. Michael Phelps, the multiple medal-winning Olympic swimmer, supported, recognized, and just allowed to thrive in that particular area. So think about ADHD not just as the inattentive type, hyperactive, but there's many different parts to it that once supported, we can start to see growth in individuals. A core part of ADHD is something called executive functioning. And so with executive functioning, we're looking at individuals why it becomes a challenge in class, it's not just about concentration. It's not about procrastination. It's not just about them being lazy. Actually, those are all, in many ways, quite judgmental ways of understanding without getting enough information about the particular child, the teen, or even adult right now. They do have differences. Their differences might come across as impulsive, or not thinking thinking a lot before making a decision. They might forget things, forget where they've placed things, need mom to be reminding them constantly, need teacher to be reminding them constantly, need a spouse to be reminding them constantly. Those are the signs of when executive functioning is not working well. When it is working well, and it's supported and coached as well, then we see individuals having a little bit more time to be able to think, to have that emotional control. Even if they make a mistake, they've learned the skills how to repair and to get ready and to move forward from there. They recognize that they will have challenges with their working memory, simply because the ADHD mind takes in more information than most people. It's taking a lot more details than most people, to the point that it can get flooded. And when they recognize it and able to build in new strategies around working memory, suddenly we see differences in class work, suddenly we see differences in organization, and even emotional state of mind or emotional presentation. The young girl that I mentioned that I met last week, the 8-year-old girl, there's a lot more put in place from term 1 to term 2 around her executive functioning, and she's actually reaping the benefits of that. Yeah. The other thing that goes unrecognized is around learning difficulties. And so please, if you're finding that your child is struggling at school, my encouragement to you is to try and find out a little bit more. I know it's hard for us as parents because we are dependent on what school feeds back to us. And I also know it can be hard for educators and teachers as well, because they have lots of different stressors, a lot of pressure. They've got to manage multiple students. And even if they want to give personal attention or understand each child a bit more, they might not be able to have the time and the capacity to do so. But we need to be able to explore this and understand this. Some of you, even this evening, as you're watching this, you might realize, I'm not great at reading, but give me a video, give me something audio, and that's my preferred way of learning. If that is you, try and identify what your preferred learning style. It may not mean you've got dyslexia, but it's also a way that you will find the way to flourish in terms of taking in knowledge and being able to use that knowledge. Dyslexia, on the other hand, is also around a visual spatial difference as well. We're thinking about the way letters and things are seen in a 2D form. Most people with dyslexia, I met another parent last week. This guy is a mechanic, but a very specialized mechanic, and he's got dyslexia. And it's because of that ability to see things in 3D mentally, he's able to problem solve and find solutions in unique ways. I'm going to quickly spend some time on the issue for those who are who have come from different countries, or might go to different countries, and what that implication might mean if you are neurodiverse or have a child who's neurodiverse. So there are some countries where it's very important to declare if a person has a neurodevelopmental difference, specifically autism or ADHD. The challenge with a lot of the declarations or giving information is that they haven't, the ones that I've seen, is that they haven't asked for specifications. For example, someone who is described as having autism level 1, which means that they are autistic, but they're able to function independently very well. And actually our society is very dependent on individuals who have autism level 1 because of their unique contributions. But sometimes it's, the non-verbal child who needs 24/7 support by a person, that's considered as autism. And what governments are thinking about is, what is the burden of cost to them? So if we take in this particular child, are they going to be needing more disability support? Are they going to be needing more health funding? And what is that burden of cost to us? And so sometimes the processes and regulations tend to sift those individuals out. That becomes very hard for families who maybe there's a few members who are allowed to be in the country and just this one particular person is not able to be there. But there are some conditions. I've seen also some individuals come into New Zealand, come into the country, and they have allowed on special conditions, special considerations, mainly due to what the benefit the family brings to the country as well. Maybe there could be unique expertise or some other reason why they're coming into the country. In some countries, I've had the privilege of being part of assessments with people from China, Japan, from Pacific Islands, throughout New Zealand, from Australia, the UK as well. And with some countries, people already have an awareness of what autism, ADHD, or neurodiversity is like. So they've been thinking about it for a while. But there are some countries where it's not in the mainstream media. Neurodiversity is not even a term that is well known. And so they would consider neurodiversity in a very different way in that particular country. Differences can be assigned to culture, religious beliefs, spirituality, race, ethnicity. It could be even judgments around their personality, or if a family's done something wrong. And in worst case scenarios, it means stigma and exclusion for those families when they actually haven't done anything really wrong. We know of instances where there's conscious bias and sometimes unconscious bias. Just seeing, for example, a referral note with somebody being autistic, it might bring up a whole lot of information for a professional or create an impression without actually meeting that individual. And the same thing goes for ADHD or dyslexia, and so those biases can influence the type of service that's presented as well. The other part is the medicalization of neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is not a medical term, but sometimes individuals are not well and they need medical support. That's very different. The hard part about understanding or getting confirmation of neurodiversity is that we have to go through some specialists who are based in the medical field. But it's important to note that medicine is not, and pharmacology, or using medical support, medication support, is not the only way to treat and support individuals who are neurodiverse. People also have difficulty accessing the public health system. The biggest disability of all is really about how people respond to the neurodiverse individual. What we can do and what we can promote for others, if we're already doing this, is an unconditional acceptance of a person. The person who's stimming, who looks weird, who looks, they could be mentally unstable. They actually, if we take a little bit more time just to understand and observe and maybe get a bit more information, we might have a totally different perspective of what's happening for them. The important part for us is to be curious, get information, and it helps us to understand before coming to a conclusion. And what's missing from a lot of the actually most of the diagnostic criteria is lived experience. And that's why we see a proliferation of people identifying themselves as neurodiverse through watching social media, because they are linking and they're identifying similar types of experiences in others on social media. So for example, even ADHD, a lot of people are thinking, oh, I might have ADHD. And there's been a lot of criticism about social media. Actually, my own belief is that what people are recognizing is the challenges in executive functioning that others are sharing about, whether it's their working memory, whether it's their planning or prioritizing. It may not necessarily be ADHD, but people are recognizing it and saying, there's something different for me. And that could help explain why things don't make sense. For professionals, we all working within a particular type of framework, whichever organization we in. We've got limitations and we might have opportunities. But what could be really valuable is our own curiosity, our own research, and getting more information just to feed and develop our practice. One of the best ways is to, yes, it is to read, is to watch videos, is to attend webinars, but getting information directly from someone about their lived experiences and trying to make sense of that, trying to empathize, is one of the most powerful ways of being relevant to that person. With autism, it's often noted that autism is an issue in the social communication challenges. It's about the autistic person not having empathy for another person. Actually, that is a myth and it's false. Through some of the psychometrics that is used in assessing, the empathy levels, especially for women and girls who are autistic, are extremely high. And that's not covered in the diagnostic criteria, where extremely high to the point where if someone is distressed or an animal is distressed, it's almost as if they're feeling it for themselves. The question with double empathy, though, is that is the professional or the person working with them empathizing enough to understand the neurodiverse individual? We also need to come from, as professionals, come from a place not of diagnostic criteria, but presuming that actually, besides the presenting issues and the challenges, actually there are strengths that have been hidden, that are actually being overwhelmed by all of the challenges right now. Once those challenges settle, the beauty of their gifting and their talents can come to the fore. And I personally, I work from that particular place. I've learned from that particular place, and I've seen it from that particular place, that once we can get past the stress, the anxiety, the hopelessness, and every other sensory and environmental challenge, a lot more of the individual comes to the fore. Yeah. Also, when working with someone who's neurodiverse, every individual may be very different. Every time we plan our session, every time we plan our interaction, our phone call, setting up appointments may be very different. Are we willing to be flexible enough to accommodate that? Are we willing to adjust so that individual can have a better outcome than in their previous experiences? So we need to be comfortable with actually feeling uncomfortable. We need to be comfortable with someone actually talking about one thing and going to a second, third, fourth thing before coming back to the first thing. We need to be comfortable with lots of stimming and movement around, and actually the person is still concentrating on what we're doing together. When we're in that particular space, that becomes more relevant for the client. I'm not going to go into the details of this. It's a diagram. There's lots of information. It will be available in the presentation for anybody who needs it. But this is from the Lancet Journal on, it's a child and adolescent issue in 2023. And it's an example of how diagnostic criteria have actually skewed things, where I often hear this. And I mentioned ADHD. I did it 2 weeks ago to a mom when we were talking, and I said, you know what? She mentioned a description of a few things for a child. I said, have you wondered about ADHD? And she said, no, he's already medicated. That was the first response. And I thought, wow, okay, I'm glad you got that. But you know, ADHD is not just about medication. Actually, that's really a small part of it. When we understand the way to support a person with ADHD, we need to look at their environment. We need to look at what's going on for them psychologically. We need to look at their unique strengths. We need to look at the behaviors that come specifically for those who have an ADHD profile. And even with ADHD, it's not just ADHD in one particular way. There's inattentiveness. And what's it like for that person for that unique inattentiveness? What's it like for their hyperactivity? What's it like for their entrepreneurial skills or their creativity? What's it like for them? Do they have any co-occurring issues as well? And so medication is just one small part of it. Sometimes I hear from schools as well, the emphasis of needing medication so that a child can be in class. And yes, it helps to focus while they're in a confined place. But the experience for the child when they talk about brain fog, things going slow, things feeling dull, not feeling themselves, sometimes feeling awesome and great, all of those experiences are not always accounted for. This also has an impact on families. Unfortunately, relationships, statistics show that marriages where there's a child who's neurodiverse take a lot more strain than a neurotypical marriage. The impacts on the family flows quite wide. It has an impact on siblings, physical, mental impacts on parents, stress, acute anxiety as well coming up for parents. And what's not often considered is that there could be genetic connections with diagnoses as well. So a child could be confirmed as autistic, and then the parent might likely be as well. Not always, but could be. And I've been through so many assessments where we've gone through assessment for a child, and the parent at the end of it says, you know what, I've been thinking about myself. When we've gone through this, I wonder if I'm autistic or I have ADHD. And there's been a few parents where we've actually gone through and done assessments for them as well. Unfortunately, it also impacts the lifestyle for individuals. Parents have hope, families have hope. Individuals would like to do lots more, but neurodiversity and the limitations, especially when it's unsupported, confines a family in terms of what they can do. So some key questions I'm going to leave to you, and we'll get to our Q&A quite soon, is a diagnosis confirmation or confirmation necessary to access support? Do we need to just wait for that and wait for the psychiatrist, the psychologist, the educational psychologist, to give a confirmation before we can access support? Can we start some strategies right now before that, even if we have strong inclination that this is what could be going on for the child? And should waiting equal inaction? That means doing nothing. Or can we be proactive and do something to limit the stress, increase the window of tolerance, allow the person to be in a place where there's less stress as possible? So what families can do? Families, number one, be a detective, research and gather information. If you've come to this webinar today to get more information, awesome. That's one way of getting it. Show compassion and empathy, especially for family members. When you're in it and behaviors happening that's challenging, you get drawn into it, you get upset, you get annoyed. It's hard. But key thing, don't take it personal. Take it as information. Step back, take moments out of it. Find someone that you can share this information with, reflect, process it. You may find functions of why this behavior is happening. It could be sensory related, it could be escape or avoidance of something overwhelming. Look for strengths, invest in quality time as well. And lastly, develop a team around the person. Some key places where you can get help. New Zealand is a place where there's some lovely and awesome resources. You do not need a diagnosis to be able to speak to someone and get some help. You could be Altogether Autism, as well as Autism New Zealand, wonderful people and teams and services there. Their websites also have lots of good information. ADHD New Zealand as well. We've got the Dyslexia Foundation, as well as the Mental Health Foundation. For those wondering about school and education, it's important to note that there are systems and strategies in place throughout the Ministry of Education from year 0 through to 13 that is supposed to support neurodiverse individuals and even those who are suspected. You know, you do not always need a confirmation to be able to start having something different, or have a conversation with a teacher, or try to access learning support. Sometimes they might need a diagnosis, but it doesn't mean adjustments or accommodations in class don't have to start. Other resources that could be useful, and these are New Zealand-based resources. I am autistic, and this is ADHD, written by Chanel Moriah. So thank you. Sorry for going a little over time, and I hope we got enough time for Q&A. So let me stop sharing here and get to the team.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leshaun, for sharing. I think it was heaps and heaps of knowledge. If we were in person, we're going to just get up and ululate and do all sorts. But being online and also almost running out of time, I think we'll just keep that until the very end. So I can see we are almost at time. So what I'll ask is, if you do have a few minutes, Leshaun, to remain online, would welcome that. If anybody else wants to stay along and hear some of the responses, have a conversation, please do stay. This session has been recorded and will be shared with everybody who has registered. If you had not registered, I think we'll have a link to the evaluation being posted in the chat. Please share your email address on there so that we can share with you the link to the recording in the slides as well. So yeah, jumping into the questions, I think the first one was, will the slides be available? I think you've said yes.
Yes.
So that one's answered. There's a question about how do you help someone who is now an adult to seek an assessment?
Great. There are actually quite a lot of practitioners who are doing adult assessments. Some of them are doing it online. Ideally, for myself, when it comes to autism, ideally at least one in-person session. But if you go to autism, if you're thinking about autism, you can go to Autism New Zealand's website, and they've got a list under the community tab of different professionals who are recognized, who are able to do assessments throughout the country.
Yep, that's great. Thanks for that. I think Wanjiku comments in the chat to say one of the traits that that they've tried to have sorted is tiptoe walking. So they've noted that the child walks very well in a swimming pool, but everywhere else he tiptoes.
That's a great point, Wanjiku. In this particular instance, it's important to note that we're thinking about neurodiversity can also include physical differences to some extent. So that's where pediatricians and occupational therapists can be really helpful. With the tiptoeing as well, we got to think about how does it impact their lifestyle? Is it preventing them from doing any particular types of sport or walking or movement? I've met quite a few individuals who tiptoe, but they're still able to function really well and do things. So yes, we can be worried about it, but I think that's where the role of a pediatrician, occupational therapist might be a little bit more helpful.
Thanks for that. So you did talk a little bit about bias. So there's a question about how can we tell if bias is at play when we're seeking support? Are there things that we should look out for, to be able to say, oh yeah, something else is happening here?
That's a great point. I think, when systems and policies and processes are very clear, they should be applied to everyone equally. And when we see something not being applied to someone in the same way that it's being applied to another person, the question is why? And that can help us to understand what that difference is. The thing with unconscious bias is that for all of us, even here today, is that we might have an impression about someone or something, and that influences the way we interact with them or how we decide to do something for them. And it's important to be aware of that. And in the worst case scenario, I come originally from South Africa, so I can talk freely about this, but if racism is at play, we need to be able to recognize, gather evidence about it, to say that actually I've seen my child being treated very differently on more than one occasion. I don't understand why, but I'm wondering if it's possibly this. And, you know, I've seen another child treated differently. It may not even be racism, but we need to, it would be naive of me to say that it's not relevant, especially in the New Zealand context. We've got enough statistics and research to show that there is a bias as well, even in the health outcomes. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. It is a tricky thing to you know, like to point out, but I think just being aware that it could be a possibility is a good thing, I guess, to be aware of. Just looking if there are any other questions before we officially close the session. Sorry, I'll just ask someone from the team if you could post the evaluation form link, please. Sorry, just checking. There's a question on from Sarah. I hear that the diagnosis of ADHD is tricky for preteens and adolescents. Is that true?
Actually, it depends on what's happening for that particular child, but the systems are very clear from the ages 6 going forward. So children younger than 6 can be diagnosed with ADHD. There's not a lot of pediatricians or child psychiatrists who are comfortable with doing that, simply because the diagnostic criteria right now looks at needing information from more than one setting. So it's not just home, it's from school. And usually kids are at school from the age of 5 or 6. For teens, if there's something else going on for them, there's some emerging research around the impact of gaming. Post-COVID as well, we've had a lot of impact on the way we do things, the way we use devices, our working memory, etc. And that can create a bit of things to consider within assessment. But I'd like to say to Sarah, that should not exclude a teen or a child from being assessed. Actually, the earlier we're wondering about it, the better it is, because we can start, you know, putting some strategies or trying to release stress or focus on their strengths, even before getting to a point of confirming a diagnosis.
Yeah, that's great. So I think Maka and the Black House, I think they're all almost related. So somebody's asking, so oh no. So the first question is, how can we access you, Leshaun? Like, how can we be in touch with your practice? If we want, you know, to talk a bit more about some of these things, how can we contact you? That's the first one. The other one is, so based on what you have said regarding age, does that mean getting a diagnosis under 6 years old might be inaccurate?
No, it's not inaccurate, but it is a little harder to get there. And I'll give you an example why. So one of the key psychometric forms that's used in the ADHD assessments is the Conners. So the Conners form and the Conners has been developed over time. It covers a lot of different key areas that's used in the assessment. Now, the Conners itself only starts from the age of 6. And most clinicians using in assessing ADHD use the Conners. So there are some, I know in the States and Canada, there are some tools that use a preschool screening for ADHD, but it's not widely accepted in most systems as yet, so unfortunately people have to wait a little bit more. So it won't be inaccurate, but it's just that people are more hesitant, I would say, to be able to confirm it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. I think we've sort of run out of questions. I think Sarah does put another question asking about resources to support parents or caregivers in helping with executive function coaching.
Oh, right. That's a great question, Sarah. And because that's such a big need. For a while, there was a big trend around ADHD coaching. I think it's still happening globally. We're trying to get certified coaches as well. There's not enough, unfortunately. But what I would suggest for parents, I would say parents, now that you've got the term executive coaching, try to discover and explore, read around what that might mean. I'm hoping to develop, I've got some modules around executive functioning as well, and to be able to present that. So I'm hoping that, and I'm also doing coaching. I'm doing coaching with adults who have ADHD. One of them is a school principal, awesome, brilliant man, but he's recognized that actually there's areas in executive functioning that he needs to develop on. So if you can find a clinician, and it's not a therapist, I must say psychotherapy and coaching is very different. Psychotherapy will help with the emotional aspects and the mental health aspects of executive coaching, but it doesn't always help with time management, organization, planning, prioritization. Those need specific type of support. I don't think I've answered your question really well. We just need to, there's just a lack of executive functioning coaches around, I think, and resources.
That's great. Thank you so much. I think we've extended beyond our scheduled time, but I just want to acknowledge everybody who has stayed for these extra minutes. I think it just shows just how valuable this learning space has been. I think I have a lot of take-home points, but I think the biggest one is the biggest disability is how society and systems respond to difference or to neurodivergent individuals. So I hope to be a better person or a better part of the society by just, recognizing difference and embracing it in a way that is supportive and neuro-affirming, like you say. So again, I want to thank you, Leshaun, for just taking this time to share with us. I think a lot of learning has happened, and we look forward again to connecting with you, I guess responding to any other questions that come up, but also once we share the recording and the slides, anything that does come out, we'll just, connect with you. I don't know whether you'll be okay sharing your contact details as well. That will also email out to the people we have registered, especially if they've got additional questions. So yeah, I think we just get to that point where we just have to close. Where I come from, if you don't just, shut everything, you'll keep going. So I think we'll just come to that point where we close this meeting. I've pasted the karakia to close in the chat, so please join me. But before I start that, I'll ask people to complete the evaluation form as well, so that at least we know how to prepare for the coming hui and what topics people would want to have us discuss. But yeah, thank you everybody. So, Einoi Tato. Tutau mai runga, tutau mai raro, tutau mai roto, tutau mai iwaho. Kia to te Maori tu, kia to te Maori tu, te Maori ora ki te katoa. Mumie huie, tai ki e. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.
Okay.